The sleek metal walls of the starship Luminous hummed softly as Captain Adrian paced down the narrow corridor. His boots clicked against the floor with every step, echoing in the quiet of the ship. The Luminous was humanity's flagship for deep space exploration, and this mission to the distant Altheran system was supposed to be just another routine stop. But so far, everything had been anything but routine. Captain Adrian was used to strange encounters. After all, he'd spent years in space, meeting aliens, exploring new worlds, and dealing with the endless unknowns of the universe. But today, his mission was anything but simple. The Altherans were a newly discovered species, soft-spoken and diplomatic, with skin that shimmered like moonlight and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. They had come to Earth seeking peaceful relations and trade agreements. They were unlike any species he ever met, and he'd been tasked with overseeing their health and safety during their stay. Adrian didn't expect trouble. The Altherans were peaceful, and their technology was far beyond Earth's. Yet here he was, rushing to the med bay with a medical emergency on his hands. When the call came through, it was urgent. One of the Altherans, their diplomat Nithya, had fallen ill during their meeting with Earth leaders. At first, it didn't seem serious. But within hours, her condition rapidly worsened. Adrian's heart raced as he ran toward the med bay, his mind racing with every possibility of what might have gone wrong. What if the food they'd brought with them was contaminated? Was it some unknown pathogen? When he entered the med bay, he saw Nithya lying unconscious on the examination table. Her normally bright blue skin had turned an unhealthy shade of pale, and her gills fluttered weakly as she gasped for breath. A small group of medical staff stood nearby, looking worried. "What happened?" Adrian demanded, walking toward them. Dr. Monroe, the ship's chief medic, looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. "Captain, we don't know. She started feeling unwell about an hour ago, and her condition has deteriorated rapidly. Her body is rejecting everything we've tried so far." Adrian's mind worked quickly, scanning through every medical emergency he'd ever faced. He had experience treating humans, but this was different. The Altherans weren't like anything on Earth. What if their biology was so different that normal medicine wouldn't work? "We need to stabilize her immediately," Adrian said, his voice firm. "I'll try something from Earth's medical arsenal. If it works, great. If not, we'll figure out another solution." He didn't wait for approval. He wasn't a doctor, but as captain, he was trained to handle any situation. With a sense of urgency, he pulled out a vial of penicillin, a common antibiotic used on Earth. He didn't know if it would work on Nithya, but it was worth a shot. He wasn't about to let her die on his watch. With steady hands, he injected the medication into Nithya's arm and watched her closely, waiting for a reaction. For a long moment, nothing happened. Adrian felt the tension in the air, and for the first time, he doubted his choice. Was he about to make a fatal mistake? Then, slowly, Nithya's breathing began to steady. Her skin, which had been pale, started to regain its blue glow. It was subtle, but it was something. Adrian exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Is she?" Dr. Monroe asked, stepping closer to observe. "She's stabilizing," Adrian confirmed, looking at Nithya's vital signs on the monitor. "I think the antibiotic worked." But as he watched, something strange happened. Nithya's eyelids fluttered open, and her eyes, normally cool and distant, locked onto him. There was something in them, something Adrian couldn't quite place. It wasn't just gratitude or relief. No, it was something more, intense. Nithya's gaze didn't waver, and as she slowly sat up on the table, her body language shifted. She tilted her head, observing him with an almost predatory curiosity. Adrian took a step back, unease creeping into his chest. He'd never seen an alien react like this before, and it unsettled him. "Captain." Nithya's voice was low, almost breathless. She reached up and brushed a hand through her silken, silver hair, her fingers lingering as if savoring the sensation. "This This medicine, it is unlike anything I have ever experienced. Adrian hesitated, unsure of what she meant. It's just penicillin, he said, his tone awkward. A standard Earth antibiotic. Nothing special. Nithia's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving him. No, she said, her voice soft, but filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. This is not just medicine. This feeling, this rush in my body, it is unlike anything I have ever known. She inhaled deeply, her tongue flicking out to taste the air around her. The way she moved, it was almost predatory, like a feline in the wild sensing something it wanted. Adrian felt his heart race, his instincts screaming at him that something was off. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Nithia blinked slowly, her gaze shifting to the side as she seemed to focus on something else for a moment. Then she looked back at him, her eyes now gleaming with an emotion he couldn't name. "I am better," she said, almost as if she were speaking to herself. She placed a hand over her chest, her expression softening. "I feel alive, in a way I have never felt before." Adrian took another step back, glancing at Dr. Monroe, who had an unreadable look on his face. The doctor knew something wasn't right, but he didn't say anything. He simply observed. Nithia's gaze shifted once more, and for a split second, Adrian could have sworn he saw a flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. Her tongue flicked out again, more deliberately this time, as though she were tasting his scent. Adrian's stomach twisted. "Captain Adrian," Nithia said, her voice now lower and more sensual, "you have healed me. I owe you everything." She reached out toward him, her fingers lingering in the air between them. There was something in the way she moved that made Adrian's heart race, but it wasn't out of attraction. It was out of fear. You're welcome," Adrian said quickly, taking another step back. "I'm just doing my job." But Nithia's smile only deepened. "No, Captain, this is not just about healing." She paused, her eyes now narrowing in a way that made Adrian's skin prickle. "This is something much more." Adrian's mind raced. He had to get a hold of the situation. Something was happening to Nithia, something he didn't understand. "Dr. Monroe," Adrian said, his voice firm now, "can you run more tests? I think we need to figure out what this medicine is doing to her." Dr. Monroe nodded quickly, turning to the medical instruments, while Adrian tried to keep his attention on Nithia. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. She wasn't just a diplomat anymore. There was something more, something primal awakened by the Earth medicine. As he watched her, he couldn't help but wonder what this encounter would mean for him and the rest of the crew. And more importantly, what would it mean for the future of humanity's relationship with the Altherans? The next morning, Captain Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He couldn't stop thinking about Nithia, the way her eyes had locked onto his with such intensity. It wasn't just gratitude for saving her life, not just a simple thank you. There was something more, something that felt unsettling and strange. As much as he tried to focus on other matters, her gaze kept invading his thoughts. He was sitting in his office, going over routine ship logs, when the communication system beeped. It was an incoming message from the Altheran delegation. Adrian immediately hit the button to accept the call, trying to push the thoughts of Nithia to the back of his mind. He had a job to do, and personal distractions weren't allowed. "Captain Adrian," came the voice of Nithia's companion. Ambassador Callan, a tall, regal-looking Altheran with shimmering violet skin. "I trust our diplomat is recovering well." Adrian nodded, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Yes, Ambassador. Nithia is stable. Her condition is improving." There was a long pause before Callan spoke again. "I see. I will inform the rest of our delegation. Thank you for your efforts." The call ended abruptly, leaving Adrian alone with his thoughts again. As he was about to return to his paperwork, The door to his office slid open without warning. Adrian turned to see who it was, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing in the doorway was Nithya, looking more radiant than ever. Her blue skin shimmered in the soft light of the room, and her long silver hair flowed around her shoulders like liquid silk. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that caught Adrian's attention. There was something in her eyes, something different. "Captain," Nithya said softly, her voice smooth like honey. She stepped into the room, her movements slow and deliberate. There was a strange grace in the way she moved, like she was floating rather than walking. Adrian couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat, but he quickly pushed the feeling aside. He was the captain. He needed to maintain control. "Nithya," he said, trying to sound professional. "What brings you here? Shouldn't you be resting?" Nithya smiled, but it wasn't the calm, polite smile he had seen the day before. This was something else, something deeper, more intense. "I've rested enough, Captain," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I feel better than I've ever felt." Adrian's brow furrowed. "That's good to hear. But if you're feeling any side effects—" "I'm not feeling any side effects," Nithya interrupted, her voice dropping to a softer, almost seductive tone. "In fact, I've never felt more alive." She took a step closer to him, and Adrian instinctively took a small step back. It was subtle, but he couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. "Nithya, are you sure you're okay?" Adrian asked, trying to sound reassuring, though the situation was starting to make him uncomfortable. "You should see Dr. Monroe again, just to be safe." But Nithya didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes were fixed on him, and she was getting closer than was appropriate. Adrian was starting to realize that something was wrong. The way she was looking at him, the way she was acting, it wasn't normal. "I feel different," Nithya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The medicine, it did something to me, Captain. I don't know what it is, but I feel drawn to you. You saved my life. You gave me this new energy." Adrian's heart started to pound in his chest. He couldn't understand what was happening. He had only given her a dose of penicillin, nothing more. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, looking at him like he was the only thing that mattered. He tried to keep his composure, but the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. "Nithya," Adrian said, his voice firm but gentle, "I think you need to calm down. You're still recovering in this." He gestured between them. "This isn't the time for whatever this is. You're not thinking clearly." But Nithya shook her head, her expression unwavering. "No, Captain. I know exactly what I feel. This medicine has opened something inside me, something I didn't even know existed. It's powerful." Adrian took another step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the console on his desk. "I'm going to call Dr. Monroe," he said, his voice now urgent. He couldn't handle this on his own. This wasn't just a simple medical issue anymore. Something more complicated was at play, and he needed help. Before he could reach the console, Nithya moved with surprising speed, blocking his path. Her body was inches away from his now, and Adrian could feel the heat radiating off her. Her eyes were wide, almost feverish, and Adrian had never seen her look like this before. "Captain," she whispered, her voice a soft, melodic hum. "Don't send for help. Please." She reached up, placing a hand on his arm, and Adrian could feel his pulse quicken. He tried to pull away, but Nithya's grip tightened, her touch surprisingly strong. "Let go of me, Nithya," Adrian said, his voice now tinged with desperation. "This isn't you. You're not yourself right now. The medicine is affecting you, and I need to get you to Dr. Monroe." But Nithya's expression softened, and she let out a small, almost sad laugh. "You don't understand, Captain. It's not the medicine. It's you. You are the one who saved me. You are the one who made me feel this way." Adrian took another step back, his mind racing. He had to get control of the situation. But Nithya wasn't making it easy. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them once again. "I don't want you to call Dr. Monroe," Nithya said, her voice almost pleading. "I want to stay with you. I want to be close to you." Adrian felt his stomach twist, a cold sweat forming on the back of his neck. He had dealt with countless situations in his career as a captain. Alien threats, diplomatic tension, disasters. But this was unlike anything he had ever faced. Nithya wasn't just a diplomat anymore. She was someone he didn't understand, someone who had become dangerously obsessed with him. "Nithya," Adrian said, his voice shaking slightly, "this isn't healthy. You need help, and I'm going to make sure you get it." Nithya's expression flickered for a moment, as though she was fighting something inside herself. Her grip on his arm loosened slightly, but she didn't step away. Instead, she looked at him with an unreadable expression. "I don't need help, Captain," she said softly, her tone almost mournful. "Not from anyone but you." Adrian knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let this go any further. The last thing he wanted was for the Altheran ambassador to get involved in something he couldn't control. He quickly stepped away, his hand moving to activate the ship's emergency communication system. "I'm calling Dr. Monroe," Adrian said firmly. "And then I'm going to get you the help you need." "This is not normal, Nithya. You're not thinking clearly." For a moment, Nithya stood still, her eyes following him with a look that could only be described as longing. But then, as if something inside her snapped, she turned and walked briskly out of the room, leaving Adrian standing there, his heart still pounding in his chest. As the door slid shut behind her, Adrian took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He didn't know what to make of this, but one thing was clear: whatever the earth medicine had done to Nithya, it had changed everything. Over the next few days, Captain Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He had hoped that after calling Dr. Monroe and getting Nithya the help she needed, things would calm down. But that wasn't the case. Nithya's behavior had only grown stranger. At first, everything seemed normal. Dr. Monroe had administered some mild sedatives to Nithya to help her rest, and for a while, she seemed to be doing better. The Altheran delegation had even resumed their meetings with the human diplomats, and everything appeared to be returning to normal. But Adrian knew something was off. He just couldn't explain it. It started with little things. The way Nithya would glance at him whenever their paths crossed on the ship. The way her eyes lingered a little longer than necessary, as if she was searching for something in him. At first, Adrian brushed it off. She was just grateful, he thought. She had been on the brink of death, and now she was alive again. It made sense that she would feel some bond to him. But as the days went by, Nithya began to act differently. She wasn't just grateful anymore. She was attentive in a way that made Adrian uncomfortable. She would visit his quarters unannounced, bringing gifts from the Altheran delegation. Beautiful, glowing crystals that hummed with energy, and leave them at his door, waiting for him to find them. When he did, he would find a note attached, written in a delicate flowing script. "For you, Captain. A token of my appreciation. I hope it brings you peace." Adrian couldn't understand why she was acting like this. He had only done his job. He had saved her life, nothing more. So why did she feel the need to give him these strange, otherworldly gifts? He knew the Altherans were a deeply spiritual people, but this felt excessive. One morning, as Adrian walked through the hallways of the ship, he nearly bumped into Nithya. She was standing near the corner of the hallway, seemingly waiting for him. She smiled brightly when she saw him, her glowing blue eyes softening with warmth. "Captain Adrian," she said, her voice as melodic as always. "I've been looking for you." Adrian paused, a sense of unease washing over him. "Nithya, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with your delegation? There's a meeting in an hour." Nithya's smile remained, but there was a strange intensity to it now. I wanted to speak with you. I've been thinking about you a lot, Captain. About what you did for me. How you saved me." She took a step closer to him, and Adrian instinctively took a step back. But Nithya wasn't deterred. "You're so kind, so strong. You have no idea what it means to me." Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know how to react. He had never been good at dealing with people who were too close for comfort, especially when they were being so intense. "Nithya," he said gently, trying to keep things professional, "I'm glad you're feeling better, but I think you need to focus on your work. Your delegation is counting on you." But Nithya didn't seem to hear him. She took another step forward, her voice dropping lower. "I don't care about my delegation right now. I only care about you. You gave me life, Captain. And I want to give something back." Adrian felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This wasn't just gratitude anymore. This was something else entirely. Nithya's gaze was intense, and her body language was too familiar. She wasn't just acting like a grateful patient. She was acting like someone who had become obsessed. "I've thought about you every moment since I woke up," Nithya continued, her voice almost a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about you, Captain. I want to be with you." Adrian felt his heart race, his mind spinning. This wasn't just a passing phase. Nithya was becoming fixated on him. He had seen obsession before, back when he'd been stationed on Earth, dealing with dangerous situations where people couldn't let go of their emotions. But this was different. Nithya was an alien. Her biology, her emotions, her entire understanding of relationships was so different from his own. He didn't know how to handle this. He tried to keep his voice calm. "Nithya, you don't know what you're saying. You're still recovering, and this isn't healthy." But Nithya only shook her head slowly, a faint smile still on her lips. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I know exactly what I want. I want you." The way she said it sent a wave of discomfort through Adrian's entire body. He had to get control of this situation. He had to make it clear to her that this wasn't normal, that he was just doing his job. But Nithya wasn't listening. She was beyond reason. "I don't want you to worry about anything, Captain," she said softly, her voice full of affection. "I'll take care of everything. All you need to do is be with me." Adrian took a step back, his mind racing. "No, Nithya. I'm not. This isn't going to happen." But she reached out, her fingers brushing his arm lightly. "You saved me. You're the one I owe everything to." Her voice became almost pleading, like she was trying to convince him, or perhaps herself. "Let me be with you, Captain. Let me show you how much I appreciate you." Adrian's heart was hammering in his chest, and he could feel a cold sweat beginning to form. He had to get away from her. He had to get help. "I'm calling Dr. Monroe," Adrian said, his voice firm this time. "You're not thinking clearly. You need help, Nithya." But Nithya didn't step back. She stood still, her expression softening, almost as if she understood what he was saying but refused to listen. "I don't need help," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I just need you." Before Adrian could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling more confused and unsettled than ever. This wasn't just a case of an alien being grateful for her life. It was something deeper, something far more complicated. As the days passed, it only got worse. Nithya began appearing in places she knew he would be: his quarters, the mess hall, even the bridge. She would linger nearby, her eyes always on him, her movements subtle but deliberate. It was clear that she was no longer interested in maintaining a professional distance. She was fixated on him. One evening, when Adrian was in his quarters, he received a small package at his door. Inside was another glowing crystal, along with a note. "For you, Captain. You are my savior. You are my everything." Adrian stared at the note for a long time, a sinking feeling in his chest. It was clear now that Nithya wasn't just grateful anymore. She had become obsessed. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this obsession was rooted in something that wasn't just a chemical reaction to the medicine. There was something deeper, something tied to her species, to their biology, that he didn't fully understand. He had to stop this before it got worse. But how? How could he break through to Nithya when she was so deeply lost in this obsession? Adrian knew one thing for sure. He was in over his head. Captain Adrian sat alone in his quarters, staring at the glowing crystal that Nithya had left him. The soft hum of the alien object filled the room, but it didn't bring him comfort. In fact, it made him more unsettled. He had never seen a crystal like this before. Its energy was subtle, almost intoxicating. But he couldn't focus on that. There was something much more pressing on his mind. Nithya's obsession. He had tried everything to distance himself from her. He tried to be professional, to remind her of her duty to the Altheran delegation, but she wouldn't listen. She would show up at his door unannounced, bringing more gifts, more cryptic notes. Every time he saw her, his anxiety grew. She was relentless, and he didn't know how much longer he could keep up the facade that everything was fine. The situation had begun to affect more than just him. The entire crew had started to notice. The diplomatic channels between the humans and the Altherans were becoming strained. Nithya's behavior was a constant topic of conversation among the crew, and whispers began to spread. "Did you hear about Captain Adrian?" One of the officers whispered in the mess hall. "Seems like that Altheran diplomat is obsessed with him." Adrian had overheard the conversation, but he hadn't said anything. What could he say? He wasn't even sure what was happening himself. All he knew was that this wasn't just a minor issue. It was becoming a diplomatic crisis. The following day, as Adrian was walking down the corridor to the bridge, he was stopped by Commander Hart, his second in command. She had a serious expression on her face, her brow furrowed with concern. "Captain," she said, her voice low, "we need to talk." Adrian knew what this was about before she even said another word. He nodded and gestured for her to follow him into his office. The door slid shut behind them, and he sat behind his desk, his hands pressed against his temples, trying to focus. "What's going on?" Hart asked, sitting down across from him. Adrian let out a long sigh. "It's Nithya. She's becoming obsessed with me. She keeps following me, showing up at my door. It's starting to affect the crew, and I'm worried it might impact our relations with the Altherans." Commander Hart's eyes widened. "That bad, huh? We've been hearing the rumors. The crew's worried about the tension. They're saying that it's only a matter of time before this turns into a full-blown diplomatic incident." Adrian nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't know how to stop it. Every time I try to push her away, she gets more persistent. And I'm starting to think that it's not just her. There's something about this situation that's beyond her control." Hart leaned back in her chair, thinking for a moment. "I don't think you're wrong. But whatever's going on with Nithya, it's spilling over into everything else. And we can't afford to lose the trust of the Altherans. They're key allies in this part of the galaxy. If this escalates, it could jeopardize everything." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I know. I don't know what to do. I've already reported it to Ambassador Callan, but I don't think he understands the gravity of the situation. Nithya's behavior is affecting the entire mission, but I don't know how to make him see that." "Well, it's clear that you need help," Hart said, standing up. "And you're not going to solve this on your own. You need to bring this to the higher-ups. Make them understand that this isn't just a personal issue. It's a diplomatic one." Adrian nodded slowly. "You're right. I need to escalate this before it gets worse. We can't afford to have this escalate any further. If Nithya's obsession continues unchecked, it could cause irreparable harm to our relationship with the Altherans." With a sense of resolve settling over him, Adrian stood up. "I'm going to have a private meeting with Ambassador Callan. It's time we addressed this head-on." As he made his way to the Altheran ambassador's quarters, Adrian's heart raced. He had to find a way to convince Callan that this wasn't just a matter of personal preference. It was something deeply embedded in Nithya's psychology, perhaps even her biology. If he couldn't make Colin understand, he wasn't sure what would happen next. When Adrian arrived at Colin's quarters, the ambassador was waiting for him. The Altheran stood tall, his violet skin glowing softly under the dim lights. His expression was one of curiosity, but also guarded, as though he already knew why Adrian was there. "Captain," Colin said, his voice warm but with an edge of formality. "What brings you here? Is there something I can assist you with?" Adrian swallowed, gathering his thoughts before speaking. "Ambassador, we need to talk about Nithya." Colin's expression shifted ever so slightly, though his voice remained calm. "What about Nithya?" "It's about her behavior," Adrian began. "She's been increasingly fixated on me. She's showing up unannounced, giving me gifts, and making it clear that she wants more than just a diplomatic relationship. It's becoming problematic." Colin's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Adrian took a deep breath and continued. "I tried to distance myself, but it's only made things worse. Nithya isn't responding to reason, and if we don't address this, it could escalate into a major diplomatic crisis. The crew's noticed, and it's starting to affect morale. I'm worried it could harm our relationship with the Altherans if we don't intervene." There was a long silence as Colin considered Adrian's words. Finally, he spoke. "I understand your concerns, Captain, but you must understand something. Nithya's feelings may not be entirely under her control. Altheran emotions are complex. When we experience intense gratitude or bonding, it can sometimes manifest in ways that appear obsessive to other species." Colin's expression softened. "No, it is not normal. But it is an aspect of Altheran nature. Our species experiences profound emotional connections in a way that can be difficult for others to understand. When someone saves an Altheran's life, it is often seen as a deeply sacred bond." Adrian's stomach turned. But she's not thinking clearly. She's becoming obsessed. This is no longer a simple matter of gratitude. She's crossing boundaries, Ambassador. Colin sighed, his violet eyes filled with something resembling sorrow. "I see. Perhaps we should have addressed this earlier, but we underestimated the effect of your medical intervention. The earth medicine. It may have amplified Nithya's emotional response. This complicates things. So, what do we do now?" Adrian asked, his voice tight with frustration. "We will take immediate action," Colin said firmly. "I will speak with Nithya. She will be removed from any diplomatic duties for the time being, and we will ensure she receives the proper care. I will also ensure that no further complications arise from this." Adrian felt a sense of relief, but the knot in his stomach remained. "Thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate your understanding. This needs to be resolved quickly, or else it could jeopardize everything we've worked for." Colin nodded. "Rest assured, Captain. I will handle this with the utmost care. We value our relationship with humanity, and we will do whatever it takes to prevent this from becoming a crisis." As Adrian left Colin's quarters, he felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The situation was far from over, but at least there was a plan in motion. He could only hope that Colin's intervention would be enough to put an end to Nithya's dangerous obsession. But as he walked back down the hallway toward his own quarters, a nagging feeling lingered at the back of his mind. Even though the immediate threat had been addressed, Adrian knew that the diplomatic crisis was far from resolved. There were still too many unknowns, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Captain Adrian paced back and forth in his quarters, his hands running through his hair in frustration. The situation with Nithya had escalated beyond his worst fears. Despite the intervention from Ambassador Colin, despite the reassurances that the Altherans would handle Nithya's behavior, the problem was far from over. It was only growing worse. After their conversation, Colin had indeed removed Nithya from her diplomatic duties. She was supposed to have been receiving medical care, but Adrian hadn't heard much about her since. He had tried to move on, to refocus on the mission at hand, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every crew member on the ship seemed to sense it. The unease, the uncertainty. The whispers had only intensified. Was the relationship between humanity and the Altherans in jeopardy? Was this a sign of something deeper? Something more dangerous? Adrian couldn't help but feel responsible. He was the one who had saved Nithia's life, the one who had given her the chance to recover. But now he felt like he was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. What if this wasn't just a personal issue? What if it was something larger? What if it was something that could ruin everything the Earth Alliance had worked for in its dealings with the Altherans? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Adrian quickly straightened up, his mind still racing as he called out, "Come in." The door slid open to reveal Commander Hart, her face serious, eyes narrowed. "Captain," she said, walking in without waiting for permission. "We need to talk." Adrian nodded, motioning for her to sit down. He could already tell from her tone that this conversation wouldn't be easy. "What's going on?" Hart wasted no time getting to the point. "It's Nithia," she said bluntly. "She's disappeared." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "We've searched every inch of the ship," Hart continued, her voice tight with urgency. "She's gone. No one's seen her for hours, and we can't track her whereabouts. It's like she vanished into thin air." Adrian's chest tightened as he stood up, pacing the room again. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. She's unstable, Commander. She's fixated on me. And now she's completely gone rogue." "We've alerted the security teams," Hart said, her voice filled with determination. "But I wanted to make sure you knew. If we can't find her soon, things could escalate beyond our control." Adrian's mind raced, flashing back to all the strange things Nithia had said to him in the past week. How she had seemed so desperate, so consumed by her emotions. Was she a danger to herself, or to the crew? Or even worse, was she planning something more sinister? "I'll organize a team to search the entire ship," Adrian said firmly, grabbing his communicator. "We need to find her before she causes any more trouble." Hart nodded and followed him out of the room. The corridors of the ship were unusually quiet, the hum of the engines the only sound in the otherwise tense silence. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He had known Nithia's obsession was dangerous, but now it was becoming clear just how far she was willing to go to fulfill it. The search began immediately. Adrian and Commander Hart led a group of officers, scouring every deck of the ship, checking every possible hiding spot. But Nithia was nowhere to be found. The crew had grown increasingly anxious, the atmosphere on the ship heavy with uncertainty. The whispers had begun again. Had Nithia gone rogue? Was she planning an attack? Was she somehow in league with a faction that wanted to bring down the entire mission? As the hours dragged on, Adrian's worry deepened. He was just about to give up and head to the bridge when he received an urgent call on his communicator. "Captain," the voice of Lieutenant Moore crackled through. "We found her." Adrian's heart leaped. "Where is she?" "Deck 12, Moore replied. "In the maintenance corridors. She's not alone. There's someone with her." Adrian felt a surge of anger and fear. "Is she a threat? What's going on?" "We can't say for sure, but she's not responding to our orders." "We need you here, Captain," Moore said, his voice tense. "On my way," Adrian replied before shutting off the communicator. He didn't wait for Commander Hart, but quickly made his way to Deck 12. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He couldn't help but feel the weight of this moment. He had done everything he could to prevent things from getting this far. But it had happened. Nithia had crossed a line, and now he had to face whatever consequences lay ahead. When Adrian arrived at the maintenance corridors, he was met by a group of officers standing at the entrance. Lieutenant Moore was among them, looking grim. "Captain," he said, stepping aside to let Adrian through. "She's in there." Adrian stepped forward, his mind racing with questions. What had Nithia done? Who was she with? And more importantly, why was she here, in this part of the ship, at this hour? He slowly walked into the dimly lit maintenance corridor. his eyes scanning the darkened area. And there, standing in the shadows, was Nithya. She was staring at him, her eyes wide, her expression a mix of desperation and something darker, something almost wild. "Nithya," Adrian called out, his voice calm but filled with authority. "What are you doing here?" For a moment, Nithya didn't answer. She just stood there, her glowing eyes never leaving his. Then, slowly, she spoke, her voice shaking with emotion. "I couldn't stay away, Captain. I couldn't. Not anymore." Adrian felt a chill run down his spine as he took a step closer. He had seen this look in her eyes before. The same look of obsession, of something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. "You're not thinking clearly, Nithya," Adrian said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You have to stop this. Whatever this is, it's not healthy. You're putting everyone in danger." Nithya's eyes darkened, and she took a step toward him. "Danger," she whispered, her voice almost a hiss. "The danger is not from me, Captain. The danger is from you. You took everything from me. You gave me life. And now you're trying to take it away. You won't leave me. You can't. I won't let you." Adrian felt a lump form in his throat as Nithya's words hit him like a punch to the chest. Her emotions were overwhelming, swirling around him like a storm he couldn't control. He had tried to be rational, tried to handle the situation with care, but now he realized that the situation had spiraled beyond anyone's control. Before he could respond, a figure stepped out from the shadows, another Altheran. It was Callan. His expression was serious, his eyes filled with regret. "Captain," he said quietly, "I am so sorry. I did not anticipate that things would get this out of hand. Nithya has. She has crossed a line. I should have seen this coming." Adrian turned to face the ambassador. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Callan stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with sorrow. "There's more to Nithya's behavior than just obsession. She has been chemically altered by the Earth medicine. The effects have been unpredictable. We should have taken her off the medication sooner. Now it's too late. Nithya's emotions are amplified beyond her control, and she's become consumed by them." Adrian's mind raced. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The Altheran's intervention had come too late, and now it was a matter of saving Nithya from herself, and saving the entire diplomatic mission from disaster. "How do we stop this?" Adrian demanded, his voice urgent. Callan looked at him with a heavy heart. "We must find a way to sever the bond that has formed between you and her. We have to undo the effects of the medicine and restore her to her original state before it's too late." Adrian felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was no longer just a matter of diplomacy. It was a fight to save not only Nithya, but everything the Earth Alliance had worked for. The breaking point had come, and everything was about to change. The maintenance corridor felt strangely silent as Captain Adrian stood facing Nithya, her eyes wild, and filled with an emotion that seemed almost uncontrollable. The words she had spoken, "You won't leave me. You can't. I won't let you," still echoed in his mind. He had been trying to help her, trying to do the right thing. But now it seemed like it was too late. Everything was unraveling, and he didn't know how to fix it. Callan, standing behind him, looked grim. The ambassador's violet skin, usually calm and collected, now appeared as though it had aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. He stepped forward, his voice filled with regret and concern. "Captain, I realize how difficult this situation is, but we have to act quickly." Adrian didn't respond immediately. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How had things gotten this far? They had tried everything. Nithya's obsession had become something much darker, something far beyond simple emotional attachment. But now, with Callan's explanation, Adrian realized that this wasn't just a matter of personal feelings. The Earth medicine, the treatment that had saved Nithya's life, had also caused this chaos, this emotional distortion. It was a mistake that couldn't be undone so easily. I don't know what to do, Callan." Adrian said, his voice filled with frustration. She's out of control. I've tried reasoning with her, but it's like she's not even listening. Callan nodded, his face tight with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. I understand, Captain. The medicine we used was meant to heal her, but it amplified her emotional responses, making her vulnerable to extreme attachment. I should have seen the signs earlier, but we were all too focused on the immediate danger she was in. Now, we have to undo the damage. Adrian felt a lump form in his throat. There had to be a way out. He couldn't lose Nithya. Not like this. She was part of the mission, part of the delicate relationship between Earth and the Altheran people. If things went wrong here, it wouldn't just be her life at stake. It could ruin everything. The alliance between their two worlds could crumble, and that would be a disaster for both sides. Turning his gaze back to Nithya, Adrian noticed the way she was watching him. Her eyes wide and pleading, yet filled with a mix of something darker. It was clear that she wasn't herself anymore. The woman he had once tried to protect, the one who had been so grateful, was now a stranger. And that stranger was clinging to him, not just emotionally, but dangerously. Why won't you understand? Nithya's voice was shaky, almost a whisper, but it was filled with desperation. I gave you my life. You owe me everything. Why are you trying to leave me now? Adrian's heart clenched as he stepped toward her slowly, carefully. He didn't want to make any sudden moves that could set her off, but he had to try. Nithya, you're not yourself. I never wanted to hurt you, but you're hurting yourself, and you're putting everyone else in danger. Nithya's eyes flickered, her expression changing, as if she were struggling to hold on to herself. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of the woman she had once been, before the medicine had twisted her emotions so completely. But it was fleeting. The obsession came rushing back, overwhelming everything else. You don't understand, she whispered. You can't leave me. I won't let you. Callan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Nithya, listen to me. We're not leaving you. We're trying to help you. The medicine you were given has altered your mind, and we need to reverse it. She shook her head violently. No, I can't. I can't let go of you, Captain. Please. Adrian took a deep breath, trying to stay calm in the face of her desperate plea. He knew this wasn't just about emotions anymore. This was something chemical, something deep within her biology, and there was no easy way out. But he couldn't give up. He couldn't leave her to spiral into this madness. He owed it to her, to the mission, to try one last time. We'll help you, Nithya, Adrian said softly. But you have to trust us. You have to let us help you, or else. I can't promise what will happen next. For a long moment, Nithya didn't say anything. She just stood there, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to find something, some reason to hold on to. But slowly, very slowly, her shoulders slumped, and she lowered her gaze. She was still trembling, but it was clear that she was listening. I don't want to lose you, Captain, she said in a broken voice. But I feel like I'm losing myself. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what to do. Adrian's heart softened at her words. She wasn't just obsessed. She was terrified. Terrified of losing him. Terrified of what she had become, and terrified of what would happen if she couldn't fix herself. In that moment, Adrian realized that this wasn't about him at all. This wasn't about the relationship between them or the diplomatic crisis. This was about saving Nithya from herself. Nithya, Adrian said gently, stepping closer to her. We're not going anywhere. You're not alone. We'll fix this together. But you have to trust us. You have to trust me. Callan stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. The process will be difficult, but we can reverse the effects of the medicine. We'll have to remove the emotional imprint it's left on you, but we can do it. Nithya looked at them both, her expression torn. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to trust them. But the fear in her eyes told Adrian everything he needed to know. She was scared. And she wasn't sure she could go through with it. She wasn't sure she could let go of the attachment that had taken root inside her. "I don't want to forget you," she whispered. "I don't want to lose what I feel. It's the only thing I have left." Adrian reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You won't lose everything, Nithya. You'll still be you. You just need to be free from this obsession." There was another long silence before Nithya slowly nodded. "Okay, I'll trust you." Callan stepped forward and began speaking in the soft, melodic language of the Altherans. Adrian didn't understand the words, but he could see the change in Nithya's expression as the ambassador's voice filled the space around them. Slowly, as Callan continued, a faint glow began to surround Nithya. Her body relaxed as the chemical influence of the medicine seemed to slowly ebb away. Adrian watched as the frantic energy that had surrounded Nithya faded, replaced by a quieter, more peaceful demeanor. The transformation was slow, but it was happening. Nithya's eyes softened, and her trembling hand slowly lowered to her sides. It was clear that the obsessive grip the medicine had on her was loosening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Adrian felt a sense of hope. When Callan finally stopped speaking, Nithya stood still for a moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, slowly, she looked up at Adrian. I feel different," she said, her voice still shaky, but no longer filled with fear. "I feel like myself again. Like I can breathe." Adrian let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. He had feared the worst, but now it seemed like there was hope. Nithya wasn't completely free from the trauma of the medicine, but she had taken the first step toward recovery. It would take time, but with the support of the Altherans, and with Adrian's help, Nithya could find herself again. Adrian stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. "You're going to be okay, Nithya. We'll get through this together." Nithya nodded, a tear escaping from her eye, as she finally allowed herself to relax. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was no longer consumed by obsession. She was free. Adrian turned to Colin, who gave him a slight nod. "It will take time," the ambassador said softly. "But this is the first step." As the group stood there in the quiet corridor, Adrian couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The diplomatic crisis, the obsession, the fear, it had all brought them to this moment. And although the road ahead would be difficult, Adrian knew that this experience had taught him something important. Sometimes, the greatest challenges weren't about saving others. It was about helping them save themselves. With that thought, Adrian turned back to Nithya, offering her a reassuring smile. The worst was over. The journey to healing had begun.